I'm going to continue my review of the Giant Trance 27.5. This will be my fourth review, and I'm up riding in the mountains right now, so I feel like I can give a more thorough overview of the ride and of the bike after spending some days riding up and down the mountains here in North Georgia. Let me first talk about the climbing characteristics of the bike. As I mentioned in one of my other videos, the bike's a little under 30 pounds, which is not light, but it's fairly respectable for a trail bike. But the weight of the bike compared to a cross-country bike, and that combined with the kind of the beefy tires and wheels that aren't super light, make for a bike that's not going to shoot up climbs. If you're trying to set any Strava records going uphill, you're probably not going to do it on this bike. That being said, I feel like the bike is a very steady climber. I typically climbed with the Pro Pedal setting in the middle. When I was going up fire roads, I put it in the locked out position, and over to the right is fully locked out. Some bikes with this Fox CTD suspension, even over to the right, it still allows for some movement in the shock. My Anthem, for example, does move when you put it over to the right, but this bike is totally locked out, and I think the reason they do that is because it's a longer travel bike and it's just going to bob more, and so I only put it on the locked out position going up pavement or fire roads. When I was climbing single track, I left it in the Pro Pedal. That way the bike could still absorb the roots and the rocks and give good traction going uphill. The climbs here where I'm riding are very steep in sections. You're talking 2 to 3 mile an hour grinds with your heart rate at 170. So a lot of effort on the climbs, but the Maestro suspension really does an excellent job of keeping the suspension firm. And there's pretty much, when you're in the saddle, there's almost no movement when you're cranking up a climb. When you get out of the saddle, it will bob a little bit, but it's not much. It still remains pretty firm when you're climbing. I did use the Talus setting in the lower position for most of my climbing, so that's down this way, and I really like Talus forks, because when you're going up a really steep climb, if you have that fork in the full open setting at 140 millimeters of travel, the front end's going to wander. Especially with a 67-degree head angle, you're kind of seated back a little bit, and it's kind of hard to control the front end. Lowering it down to 120 really helps the front end stay more precise when going up single track climbs that are real steep, especially if you have to navigate rocks and roots. Descending on the bike is really a blast. This bike is just made for going downhill. I, of course, opened up the suspension, moving the rear shock fully over to the left, opening up the front shock fully open, and of course raising the Talus to the full 140 millimeters of travel. This bike, it just floats downhill. The suspension, the Maestro suspension, really seems bottomless on descents, especially for 140 millimeters of travel. And the bike really is a stable descender, but still remains very agile. I was able to just quickly dart around trees or rocks, and a lot of that is the 650B wheels. They're right between 26 and 29, so they're going to have more stability on the descents, so it's a little bit more confident descending as far as the stability, but these still remain really agile. And this bike again is just really cut out for descending. When you're hitting 25-30 miles an hour down a descent and go over roots and rocks, the bike just remains steady and just really just absorbs all the trail obstacles. The cockpit, I think, is really set up well with the 70 millimeter stem and the bars, which are fairly wide, 730. I mean, it's not downhill bike wide, but I really like the cockpit. even climbing, I feel like the cockpit didn't set you back too much. It's a really comfortable position when climbing and really set up well for aggressive descending. The rear end is stiff. I know it only has the 135 millimeter spacing in the back, which I really harked on in one of my other reviews. But I didn't notice a lot of flex in the rear end. I never felt like the bike got off my line when I didn't want it to. It held corners really well, and I really raved about how this bike corners with the aggressive tires, the 650B wheels. I feel like the geometry is just really dialed in. I wouldn't change the geometry on this bike. I think Giant did a really good job with the geometry. So really thumbs up for the descending on this bike. If you really like descending, this is the bike to get. If you just live for the climbs, to set Strava king of the mountains, and you kind of take it easy on descents, to probably steer you towards a Giant Anthem or a more cross-country oriented bike. But if you just you'll deal with a little bit of extra weight on the climbs to just open it up on the descents, this is the bike to get. And that's what trail bikes are for. You put up with some slower times on the climbs, but on the descents is where they really come alive. So this bike is just awesome on the descent. A couple other notes. I mentioned in one of my reviews of 26 and 29 comparisons that on switchbacks I felt like 29ers did a little bit better job going up tight switchbacks, and 26ers did a better job coming down. This bike, no surprise, kind of combines those characteristics. I felt really comfortable on tight switchbacks, both going uphill and going downhill. Coming down, you can really just whip the bike around the switchbacks, and going up, you still maintain enough momentum, especially when you come around a switchback and there's some roots and rocks you got to go over. So this bike really does a good job on switchbacks. The chain guide is awesome on this bike, the MRP chain guide. This was a really good spec for this bike. I'm glad Giant put one on, because even on rough, fast descents, I did not drop a chain. I've dropped chains on other bikes that didn't have a chain guide, and that's just a pain when that happens. This bike, the chain is quiet. A lot of that's credited to the Shadow Plus rear derailleur, but the chain guide really keeps the chain in check, and again, did not drop a chain on any of my rides. So that's really nice. And finally, the tires have held up well. A lot of people talked about the Schwalbe having some soft sidewalls or wearing out pretty quick. 3 months into it, I feel like the tread is still pretty good. Again, I've said these tires grip really well, and they roll well too. I didn't feel like on pavement they slowed me down too much. I mean, they're not going to roll as fast as a cross-country tire, obviously, but for the amount of grip that you get on these tires, I feel like they roll well. So that's going to wrap up this review of the Giant Trance 27.5. I'm going to do one final review that's going to summarize all the reviews that I've done so far. It obviously won't go into as much detail, but it will be a summary of the entire bike. Thanks for watching.